How's it going, everybody? It's Captain Trips 2017 back again with another top 10 list. Today I'm going to count down my favorite top 10 arcade games from the 1990s. Now, the 90s were a bit of a weird time because by the time the 90s rolled around, the home consoles were catching up and the PC games were getting better and the arcade games were starting to fade out. And by the mid to late 90s, the arcades were pretty much gone. I mean, they never totally died. There's still some arcades around today, and every bar and restaurant has a big buck hunter and a Golden Tee golf game in it. But the arcade didn't have the prevalence that it did in the 80s. But still, we had some great games. So, without further ado, Number 10, Starblade. This one you didn't see a lot in arcades, but I would always jump at the chance to play it. Starblade was an on-rail space shooter, giving players the mission of protecting the mother planet of the Federation as it was being attacked by the mechanized planet Red Eye. Does any of this sound familiar? Okay, well maybe the story used in this game wasn't entirely original, but the game itself was pretty groundbreaking. It was one of the first video games to use real-time 3D graphics. You had to sit inside the cabinet to play the game, and the screen was magnified by a big sheet of plexiglass. The interior of the cabinet featured an early surround sound type system, so the game was quite a sensory experience for the time. Despite some horrendous voice acting, Starblade really gave a sense of being part of a larger battle, as you controlled the gunner pod in a smaller ship and flew among your own capital ships, eventually assaulting the enemy fleet and destroying the Red Eye planet itself. Starblade was eventually ported to many different home systems, and has most recently appeared on Nintendo Wii's Virtual Console and on the iOS. Number 9, Turtles in Time. This is going to be the first of many beat-em-ups that'll appear on this list, but what can I say? The 90s were all about the beat-em-ups. Beat-em-ups ruled the 90s the same way that first-person shooters ruled the 2000s. But anyway, back to Turtles in Time. This was a 4-player co-op machine that followed the heroes in the half-shell as they traveled backwards and forwards in time, all the while being pursued by the Shredder, Krang, and the usual cast of henchmen, goons, and foot soldiers. My question is this: if Shredder's able to banish the Turtles to prehistoric times, why does he bother sending his goons back in time to fight them? I mean, it's not like the Turtles can foil Shredder's schemes from 2 million years ago, but I digress. This game may not be the best brawler on the list, but it had a lot of personality, and as we used to say back in the 90s,
personality goes a long way.
This game was given a makeover in 2009 and released on the PSN and Xbox Live as Turtles in Time Reshelled. The new version was met with a very mediocre reception, and it seems that the majority of gamers still prefer the original. Number 8, Dungeons & Dragons: Shadow over Mystara. This is the second arcade game in the series that was based on the old pen and paper favorite. This one makes the list because it boasted so many improvements over its predecessor, 1993's Tower of Doom. It had improved graphics, improved combat, and 2 extra characters that were not in the first game. This game may not have been as complex as some of the RPGs that were available for home computers and consoles at the time, but it definitely had the D&D feel, featuring authentic characters and spells, and plenty of monsters from the beloved game. Unlike many 4-player beat-em-ups, Shadow over Mystara felt much more like a team effort. There were 6 different characters to choose from, and each character had his or her role in the group, much like an actual D&D campaign. This game has held on to its popularity over the years, and both D&D arcade games were recently released as a package for Nintendo's eShop, Xbox 360, PS3, and PCs as a downloadable title. Number 7, Smash TV. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, pop culture promised us television shows in the vein of The Running Man, where people would be slaughtered in horrible ways for our entertainment. Well, here we are well into the 21st century, and we're still waiting for them to appear. Also, we're still waiting for this show.
I'd buy that for $1.
No matter, because we still have Smash TV. Set in the future world of 1999, this dual-stick shooter cast 1 or 2 players as contestants in the deadliest game show on television, where they would compete for
Big money! Big prizes!
Smash TV featured a plethora of bad guys and bosses, as well as a huge assortment of weapons that players could use to dispense said bad guys and bosses. Designed by Eugene Jarvis, the same man who designed Robotron 2084 a few years earlier, Smash TV took the dual-stick shooter to a whole new level. This game was not only huge in the arcades, but at home as well. with versions being released for the NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, various home computers, and most recently for the Xbox 360 and PS3. Number 6. Street Fighter II. What can I say about this one? It's the granddaddy of tournament fighters. I realize it wasn't the first tournament fighter, and it wasn't even the first Street Fighter game. But this game was the benchmark for future fighting games. Featuring multiple playable characters, each with their own unique fighting style and moveset, Street Fighter II was one of the most popular fighting games of the decade, and of all time for that matter. It was released for several platforms, and multiple editions were released both in the arcades and at home. In fact, this game was Capcom's top seller until 2013, when it was dethroned by Resident Evil 5. I guess you could say that for several years, Street Fighter II took over the world.
Of course!
Number 5. Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder. This game was a direct sequel to 1989's runaway hit Golden Axe. It was the first 32-bit game in the series and featured superior graphics, sound, and animation. It featured 4 playable characters in comparison to the original game's 3, the only returning character being Gilius the Dwarf, this time riding on the back of the giant, Goa. Different cabinets existed for this game, allowing for 2, 3, or 4-player co-op. Cooperating players could unleash double-team moves on unsuspecting enemies. The Revenge of Death Adder was much longer than the original Golden Axe, and featured branching paths, which allowed for greater replayability. It's a real shame that to this day the Revenge of Death Adder has never been ported to a home system, but we can always hope that someday soon this 90s gem will come to a virtual console near you. Number 4. Captain America and the Avengers. Long before Joss Whedon put them up on the big screen, the Avengers starred in their own 4-player beat-em-up. Captain America, Iron Man, the Vision, and Hawkeye must team up to defeat the Red Skull, who has assembled a team of some of Marvel's mightiest villains, using his vast wealth and then placing them under mind control. Okay, so the story's pretty flimsy, and the voice acting's absolutely terrible. But what we end up with here is a fun co-op beat-em-up with some shooter stages to mix things up. There were 2 versions of the cabinet, allowing for either 2-player or 4-player co-op, and the game was ported to the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, and Game Gear. Number 3. WWF WrestleFest. This was the wrestling game to play at the arcades in the early 90s. Released when the WWF was still at the height of the popularity it garnered in the 80s, WrestleFest allowed 1 to 4 players to engage in a tag team match, looking to eventually take the tag team titles from the Legion of Doom, or compete in the Royal Rumble. Nobody ever played the Royal Rumble though, as it just ate too many quarters. This game featured a great roster of classic WWF superstars including the Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, and the Big Boss Man. Also featured was an intuitive grappling system and a moveset. As great as this game was, it was never ported to any home consoles. Instead, many inferior WWF games were released for the NES, SNES, and Sega Genesis. This game would be a great release on PSN or Xbox Live even today. Number 2. Mortal Kombat 2. This game needs no introduction. We all know Mortal Kombat as the diabolical force that would turn us all into a bunch of ravening, bloodthirsty psychopaths. At least that's what some people would have you believe. What these people didn't realize is that the senseless violence is what makes Mortal Kombat so much fun. Well, that and a great fighting system. This game boasted many improvements over the original, and it had to be on the list. New characters, new settings, more fatalities, babalities, and the introduction of friendship all helped make Mortal Kombat 2 one of the top games, not just of the 90s, but of all time. Number 1. XMen Arcade. Okay, you all know exactly which cabinet put this game in the number 1 spot. Anyone who went to the arcades back in 1992 could only marvel, no pun intended, at the 6-player dual-screen beat-em-up mayhem that was X-Men. This game was originally meant to tie in with an animated series called Pride of the X-Men. The series was scrapped after 1 episode, and X-fans would have to wait a couple more years until the Fox network debuted the X-Men animated series. In the game, players could choose from 6 of the Marvel Universe's most famous mutants as they fought against Magneto and many of their other great foes. Playable characters included the likes of Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Cyclops, or Dazzler. Dazzler? Despite being yet another game with abysmal voice acting, it delivered a great experience for comic book fans. This game has retained its popularity, and in the last few years was released for Xbox Live, PSN, iOS, and Android devices. Also, let's not forget the effect the Colossus yell has had on convention guests. So there you have it, folks. My top 10 favorite games of the 1990s. How does my list compare to yours? If I missed some of your favorites, be sure and let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this is Captain Trips signing off.